Well, today we get to discuss the most famous sorceress, or perhaps Time Lord, of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Mary Poppins. Oh hi, my name is Kyle Marshall, and this is Book vs. Movie. Mary Poppins holds a special spot in my life. I loved watching movies as a kid, and still do, but I would watch the same movies over and over again when I was young. Between ages 3 and 5, I probably watched the original Mary Poppins 2 to 3 times a week, so I've most likely seen it at least 100 times. And so, while as an adult I can see some of the cracks, it's still a film that remains special to me. But I'm putting the cart before the horse, or perhaps the fragilistic expialidocious before the supercala, as it were. In this video, we're going to discuss the first 2 books in the Mary Poppins series, written by P.L. Travers, how the original Mary Poppins film compares, and then how the new film, Mary Poppins Returns, compares to both. So let's start with the books. These are children's books first and foremost, and that is not a criticism of any kind. The first 2, published in 1934 and 1935, are called Mary Poppins and Mary Poppins Comes Back, respectively. If you're mainly knowledgeable about the Disney film, like I was up until recently, and as it looks many people are when I polled them on Twitter, what will surprise you is that there is really no narrative in the books. What I mean by that is that each chapter is, in many ways, a self-contained story, and with few exceptions, do they even refer to past events. The first book starts with the Banks children, Jane and Michael, along with their young twin siblings, in need of a nanny after their current caretaker leaves in a huff. The wind changes, and the children see a woman float in from the sky violently. This is Mary Poppins, and she is their new nanny. It's described, as soon as the shape was inside the gate, the wind seemed to catch her up into the air and fling her at the house. It was as though it had flung her first at the gate, waited for her to open it, and then had lifted and thrown her, bag and all, at the front door. The watching children heard a terrific bang, and as she landed, the whole house shook. As far as appearance, when Mary first arrives, there's this passage. Jane and Michael could see that the newcomer had shiny black hair, rather like a wooden Dutch doll, whispered Jane, and that she was thin, with large feet and hands, and small, rather peering blue eyes. The rest of the book involves different adventures, including meeting Mary's uncle, who can't stop laughing or levitating, a cow that won't stop dancing, Michael getting out of the wrong side of the bed, a woman and her 2 large daughters sticking the stars to the sky, and meeting Maya, who is the second daughter of the Pleiades, yes, the star cluster, who is doing Christmas shopping. The first book focuses mostly on Jane and Michael's perceptions and reactions of what is going on. Mary Poppins is portrayed as a fairly terse and vain character. She is constantly looking at her reflection in mirrors and glass, and anytime she responds to the children, the words used by P.L. Travers to describe Mary's mood are things like darkly, scornfully, scoffed, and threateningly. Every time they go on an adventure and the children ask her questions about it, she acts as if they are losing it. She blames their overactive imaginations to the point where the children question whether what they experienced actually did happen. The best example of this is the late night birthday party for Mary Poppins that happens at the zoo. All the animals are walking around and talking and celebrating Mary. In the morning, Michael feels like it could have been a dream and asks if Mary was at the zoo the previous night. At the zoo, in the middle of the night, me, a quiet, orderly person who knows that early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise? But were you? Jane persisted. I have all I need of zoos in this nursery, thank you, said Mary Poppins uppishly. Hyenas, orangutans, all of you, sit up straight and no more nonsense. Jane poured out her milk. Then it must have been a dream, she said, after all. Of course, they noticed the snakeskin present she was given the night before tied around her waist, proving that Mary Poppins is lying. And in fact, it seems that Mary uses imagination to her advantage. There are a few times in the 2 books where she mentions how as people grow into adulthood, they leave behind these imaginations and will forget the magic she does because they will convince themselves that it could not have actually happened. While Jane and Michael's parents make appearances, they are afterthoughts for the majority of the story, only coming in for brief amounts of comic relief. And even though Mary Poppins is constantly, in my opinion, shown to be mean, vindictive, and vain, the children do love her. In fact, in the final chapter, Mary Poppins begins to be nice to them, and they know immediately that something is very, very wrong. It's the wind that's changed course, and she disappears shortly after, much to their disappointment. The second book is very similar to the first. It can't take place much more than a year after the first. She gets caught on Michael's kite in the park, and she is pulled down back into their lives. In this book, Mary Poppins comes back. Some of the adventures they go on are Mr. Banks' old nanny coming for a visit, meeting Mary's cousin who stands on his head, floating around the sky on balloons, and helping to bring spring back after a long winter. But there's only one chapter that I want to focus on, and it's one that I think feels like a great departure from every other one in the first two books. It's a chapter called Bad Wednesday. In it, Jane is in a really bad mood, and she is by herself in the nursery. She throws the book she's reading and it cracks a Royal Dalton bowl that's on the shelf. To be honest, I have no idea what a Royal Dalton is, but it sounds fancy, and I promise to name my first child Dalton. Then the bowl begins to talk to her, and soon the children, who are painted on the bowl, bring Jane inside. Think how Mary and everyone else jumps into the chalk painting in the film. In the bowl, things start to turn creepy. The kids start to suggest Jane will never leave, and then introduce her to their great-grandfather. He rose and came towards her, smiling frighteningly, his eyes burning in their sockets with a bright, steely fire. "I hope you had a good journey, my dear," he croaked. And drawing Jane to him with a bony hand, he kissed her cheek. At the touch of his gray beard, Jane started back with a cry. "Heh heh heh." He laughed his cackling, terrifying laugh. It's never explicitly said what the motives of the great-grandfather are, but it's certainly something sinister. Mary Poppins saves Jane ultimately without any harm coming to her, but this type of terror kinda comes out of nowhere and is never referred to again. The stories seem to oscillate between adventure stories and tales with a moral lesson. I totally understand why kids would have liked them back in the early 1900s. For me, however, as a modern reader, I found myself mostly bored. Except for that chapter we just looked at, there's no real danger the kids are in. There's no narrative that's happening throughout the books, and Mary Poppins, although the books are named after her, isn't exactly a character I like. As I've said repeatedly, she seems mean and stuck up, even though she obviously has an affection for the Banks children. And pause. What is Mary Poppins? I mean it. What is she? Throughout their travels, we learn that she can speak to babies, to animals, can fly, can create illusions, has access to the fantasies hidden within London, and can bewitch people to do what she wants. So again, what is she? A witch? A powerful sorceress? One of the doctors? A Scientologist maybe? It's never really clear. Neither her powers or her backstory are ever fully explored, and I get it, that's mostly the point. The books want her to be mysterious and full of power so that she can take the protagonists on magical adventures. But at the same time, I'm a reader who craves rules, and I want to know the rules of Mary Poppins, which seem to be something that P.L. Travers cared little about. Basically, I want to know why she let Voldemort almost win. So the movie was released in 1964. It was something famously that Walt Disney himself wanted the studio to make because his daughters loved the story so much. And if you've seen the movie Saving Mr. Banks, you saw a very whitewashed version of the story of how that came to be. But that's for another time. Let's look at the original Mary Poppins film. As I said at the beginning, I can't really look at this film objectively. I really can't. I unabashedly love it. The first thing you'll notice, however, is that this film is a musical, and one of the best movie musicals of all time. I mean, every single song is a banger. The Sherman Brothers, the famous songwriting duo, really nailed it here. I would wager that pretty much every song in this film you could hum along to, if not outright know the words. Chim Chim Cheree, Spoonful of Sugar, Let's Go Fly a Kite, Feed the Birds, Jolly Holiday, and Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I mean, come on. That's epic. How many great songs are in this? This was Julie Andrews' first major film role, and it won her the Academy Award that year, something that she is still iconic for. But we should mention some of the changes that were made for this adaptation. First is the character of Mary. She is a lot more likable in the film version than the original books. While still vain and quick to side-eye someone, there is a warmth that radiates from her. She seems to truly love the family and the children she is caring for, and not merely tolerating them. The second biggest difference is that while the children are important, there is a much bigger focus on the adults. Of course, there's Mary Poppins, but Bert, who is known as the Matchman in the books, has an expanded role, as does Mrs. Banks, who is shown to be a suffragette fighting for the rights of women, if not a little absent-mindedly, and then there's Mr. Banks, struggling at the bank he works for. Hey, his name and his job are the same. And so the narrative that is added to the story is watching Mr. Banks slowly realize that he needs to spend more time with his children and less time worrying about stuffy adult things. The fantasies, though, are fully realized, the most famous one being the chalk drawing that Bert, Mary, and the kids jump into, which causes them to be in an animated world. The magic bubbles up around Mary Poppins and truly feels like something Bert says in the books. It's her. It only happens when she's around, I assure you. It's because of this narrative that I have a more emotional response by the end of the movie. We've seen the evolution of Mr. Banks and how the kids feel more connected with their family. They are out there flying a kite, and Mary looks longingly at them. She tries to convince her parrot umbrella that she is practically perfect and doesn't muddy that with sentimentality. But we can see it on her face. She's done what she came to do, and now must go. And I think this works on two levels. One, where whatever Mary Poppins actually is, a pixie maybe, she loves these kids and the family and wants to stay, but knows that she isn't really needed any longer. But then I think there is a comparison to be made with the real nannies slash parents. There comes a time where you need to let them go, or you need to leave, or they grow up, and it's sad. You need to let them leave and both of you need to move on. But that isn't exactly easy. Now, as an adult, I can notice a few things. The special effects don't always hold up. The movie drags in a few places, most notably the part where Mary visits her uncle, even though the joke he tells is important later on. And then the part with the dancing chimney sweeps, while great dance choreography, is just unnecessarily bloating the runtime. Overall, this was a movie that was made to capture children's imaginations and to show off the Sherman Brothers songwriting. It was also able to introduce us to Julie Andrews, who remains a national treasure, along with Dick Van Dyke, who uses a terrible British accent, but his comedic timing and dancing are still among the best movies has to offer. So how do you follow up a movie that was released 54 years ago? You basically lean into some nostalgia. As a fun fact, this now holds the record for live action film sequel with the longest amount of time between the last movie. 54 years is a long time. It beats Return to Oz, which waited 46 years to be released. And do yourself a favor and track down a copy of Return to Oz. It just may be the single most "what am I watching" films ever made. But Mary Poppins Returns, I feel, is in a similar vein to what Disney seems preoccupied with recently, which is to sequelize and live-actionize, if those aren't verbs they are now, all of their existing properties. They're monetizing nostalgia. The film takes place roughly 25 years after the original film, which interestingly is the correct time period for when the novels were set. Michael is now an adult with 3 children and a recently deceased wife. Jane is still around as the fun aunt who likes hanging out with her niece and nephews. Lin-Manuel Miranda plays Jack and takes the place of the Dick Van Dyke role as introducing us back into the world of Mary Poppins, and much like Bert, seems to know more than what he lets on. In the books, it's mentioned how as you grow older, you begin to believe all the things you imagined never happened. This is true for both Michael and Jane, who remember Mary Poppins, but believe their adventures to have been child's make-believe. And I think there are a couple of main differences between this film and the original. One is the color palette. This new film is lush with color and plays with the darkness in the image, whereas the original Mary Poppins has a softer color palette, almost a pastel look. I'm not saying one is better or worse, but interesting that they didn't try to copy the same film style. Second is that although we are still focusing on the adults in the story, I think the narrative is much darker in this film. In the original, it was Mr. Banks' arc to see that family was more important than money. Here, the family is about to lose the house and has a father who is openly weeping in front of his kids because of the death of his wife. It's a lot to take in. Now, I want to remain as spoiler-free as possible here, so I'm going to focus on the major positives and negatives as I see it. The positives are that Emily Blunt is phenomenal. Is anyone going to match Julie Andrews? Probably not, but she gives it a shot. Her acting, singing, and dancing are all great. In fact, the entire cast is very good. I especially want to call out the kids, one of who this is their very first film. Overall, I say that most child actors are way better than what they were 50 years ago. Not to throw shade at Karen Detrice and Matthew Garber from the original, but I mean, they're not going to blow you away. I was also a fan of the animated sequence in this film because, of course, there has to be another one. It borrows from the Royal Dalton Bowl scenario we talked about earlier, where there is something sinister happening. It also makes sense that Mary Poppins is still really looking after the Banks children, meaning the now adults. While she sort of is there to guide the new generation of children, they're shown to be much more capable than their parents were at their age. But here's where I think some of the negatives come in. Both in the books and the original movie, Mary Poppins stays outside of the true narrative. She's guiding things and using her magic to gently nudge things her way, but she stays out of outright getting her hands dirty. And in this film, that's not the case. She very much shows off her magic prowess and tilts the table quite heavily in her favor, which seems like a major departure from both the previous film and the source material. Also, and I knew this was going to be the most difficult thing for this film to live up to, but the songs are not on the same level. Say for one, I don't believe any of these songs will have the same staying power as the 6 I mentioned earlier. Now that could be because the original Mary Poppins film has been in our popular culture for a half century, so I'm prepared to eat crow on that if I'm proven wrong. Also, I feel the villain is a bit too mustache twirling for my liking, so while I greatly enjoyed my time at the theater, it's just a movie that can't live up to its original film, even though I'll probably watch this a few more times before the great umbrella calls me back to the sky. So what are the similarities? In both, Mary appears like she does in the 2 books, by floating in on the winds and by being pulled down by a kite. Many of the sequences are still there, jumping into the chalk painting, laughing with her uncle, the bird woman, and in the second we have the balloon sequence, the Dalton bowl that gets broken and then characters pulled inside of it, and then Topsy Turvy, Mary's cousin who is upside down. That's where we get Meryl Streep's probably 409th Oscar nomination. What are the differences? Mary is just so much crosser and vain in the books. The films focus primarily on the adults, whereas the books almost exclusively focus on the children. The films both add a narrative that never appears in the books, to the degree that in the second film, she is the driver of the action, which she never really was in the book series. So which was better? Well, again, not objective, but my ranking would be Mary Poppins, Mary Poppins Returns, Mary Poppins the book series. I was just not a fan of P.L. Travers' writing style and could not get into the adventures of the children like I can with other children's literature like Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, or even Peter Pan. But what do you think? Which version is your favorite? And what did I get wrong? Let me know down in the comments. I'm leaving for Christmas right after I post this video, so I'm not sure what to expect in a couple of weeks. Maybe Umbrella Academy or perhaps Beautiful Boy. I do want to try and teach myself how to say Docious Ali Expius Defragicali Bupus, but that's going a bit too far, don't you think?